start with this question that there is a change in price, and how does our consumer respond to that change in price? The discussion that we are having today is very much in line with our utility maximization concept, which we covered in the last class. Our utility maximization was done by equating the marginal utility per dollar across the goods that our consumer is buying. So for today's class, we are going to assume that our consumer is buying these two generic goods called good X and good Y. And if these two goods are being purchased, our consumer is going to maximize their utility by equating marginal utility of X divided by price of X and equate that with marginal utility from Y divided by price of Y. So the equation of utility maximization, which we covered in the last class, argues that utility maximization is a fairly important and complex concept. It is important because as a consumer, we really want to get the maximum satisfaction. It is complex because the goods that we are buying from the market really do not have the same price, and the utility that you get from buying each of these goods could also be very different. So our economic theory tells us that as long as we have these ratios equal to each other, we are fine. These ratios, the marginal utility per dollar, tells us the rate at which your dollar translates into utility. So marginal utility per dollar, which is measured by taking the marginal utility divided that by price, gives you a rate of transformation, the rate at which your money turns into satisfaction. And our economic theory argues that as long as this rate of transformation is the same across all the goods that we buy, we are okay. We are going to maximize our utility. In that context, we are now asking a new question. Suppose the price of a good, in this case, let's assume that it's good X, is going down. So if price of X goes down, what happens? In order to understand how a change in price affects our purchasing decisions, we will invoke two very important concepts called income effect and substitution effect. We will start, I could actually write those. This is from the class that I just had, so I'm being kind of lazy today. And when I write too much, I forget to talk, so I want to use the same slides. So when price change, economists argue that there are two things that happens. First of all, when price change, it makes one good relatively less expensive or more expensive than the other goods that are in that bundle. Let me repeat that statement again. Imagine our consumer is trying to buy a bundle of goods. The prices are not the same. In that bundle, suddenly price of one of the goods go down. Then economics argue that if that happens, the good for which the price have gone down somehow has become relatively cheaper compared to the other goods. The word relative is the most important one here, because the prices could be very different. One could be a car and the other one could be a can of milk. And when the price of car goes down by $500, it still makes the car more expensive than the can of milk. But in the relative sense, your car simply has just become cheaper. Do we all see that? So the emphasis is on the word relative. When the price of one good changes, that goods could become relatively cheaper or more expensive than the other good. This relative price change is called substitution effect. The substitution effect is a very simple process. It tells us that if a good becomes relatively cheaper, you buy more of that good. If a good becomes relatively more expensive, you buy less of that good. Very simple idea. Something becomes more expensive, you buy less of that. Something becomes more expensive, less expensive, you buy more of that. So our substitution effect tells us that whenever one good becomes relatively cheaper compared to other goods, you substitute the more expensive good for a cheaper good. That's where the word substitution is coming from. That whenever the price of one good changes, you substitute the more expensive good for the relatively cheaper good. Are we all clear on this? So that's only one part of the effect of a price. And this effect is fairly straightforward. Because in a minute we're going to see that substitution effect is very much like law of demand, right? Law of demand says that whenever the price of a good goes down, you buy more of that good. Whenever the price of that good goes up, you buy less of that good. That seems to be saying the same thing as what substitution effect is telling us. Isn't that right? But the process is much more complex than what we think it is. Because then there is another side of the story. And the story is that whenever there is a change in price, it not only makes a good relatively cheaper or expensive, it also changes your entire budget. And that takes us to the second concept. Okay, I now want to talk a little bit about this word called purchasing power. And I would sort of try to get an idea about what do you understand about what purchasing power means to you. Anyone? What do you think purchasing power is? So what is purchasing power?
It's the amount of goods you're able to buy based off your budget.
Okay. You're right. So purchasing power is a very simple idea. It's how much you can buy with your income. And that could be very different depending on where you are. You could have a very high level of income and you could be living in a very expensive city where stuff that you buy are less than if you have a low income but you live in a poor area. Right? So your purchasing power and your income are not the same thing. You could have very high level of income, but if the prices of goods that you buy are also very high, your purchasing power is not that high. Do we all see that? On the other hand, your income could be very, medium or not that high, but if the prices of goods that you are buying are low, you could actually have a substantially high purchasing power. Makes sense? When some of you will take principles of macroeconomics, you will realize and see that this is a fundamental concept. And it's a foundation of what we basically cover in macroeconomics. Because at the end of the day, we would argue that the basic objective of studying economics is to understand about our standard of living or our cost of living. Because that's all that matters to us. We really don't care about your income. We really don't care about what is happening to the government. We care about ourselves. And our cost of living or our standard of living really does not depend on our income, but it depends on what our purchasing power is. So you could be living in the most expensive, the most developed country in the world, but you could have a very poor purchasing power. As opposed to you living in a very poor country where your income is in a certain quantile that your purchasing power is substantially high. Although you are making less than what a poor person in a developed country is making. Makes sense? So it's all about relative income, right? So we talked about relative price, now we are talking about relative income. A lot of people don't like the word relative income because it means a lot of different things. If you don't like the word relative income, let's stick with purchasing power. We're going to say that whenever the price of a good goes down, purchasing power changes. In this case, it actually increases. Why? Because if the price of a good goes down, you now have more money to spend on the goods that you want to buy, right? Why? Because your budget depends on how much of goods you are buying. And if one of the goods becomes cheaper, you can afford to buy more of the goods, right? Do we all understand that? Are we all clear on the fact that whenever price changes, it changes our purchasing power? Whenever price goes down, it increases our purchasing power. Whenever price goes up, it reduces our purchasing power. It is very important that we have a clear understanding about purchasing power. So I'm going to pause and welcome any questions if you have one, any. So two things. So when the prices are going down, price of one good X go down, two things are happening. Good X is becoming relatively cheaper, substitution effect. Your relative income or your purchasing power is going up, income effect. Now, income effect and substitution effect tells you very different stories. Substitution effect tells you that you should buy more of the cheaper goods. Your income effect is probably the most complex concept in this debate. Your income effect tells you that if your income is going up, you should buy more of the good if the good is a normal good. But if the good turns out to be an inferior good, you should buy less of that. And you have learned that in a previous chapter. We have learned that the way we respond to changes in our income is very different from the way we respond to changes in other things. Our income is kind of confusing, right? In the context of how income changes our demand, we talked about two different kinds of goods. We talked about this good called normal good, for which if my income goes up, I buy more. And we talked about goods like inferior goods. When our income increases, I buy less of that good. And examples of inferior goods were this ramen noodle thing. So our income effect therefore is fairly complex. Our income effect could tell us a very different thing depending on what goods we are talking about. If the good is a normal good, our income effect will tell us that you should buy more if your income or if your purchasing power goes up, and you should buy less if your income or your purchasing power goes down. But if your good is an inferior good, you should buy more if your purchasing power goes down, and you should buy less if your purchasing power goes up. Okay? Makes sense. Let's now look at these two effects together. Because we are basically, so that's what is happening. Your income effect is going to tell you two different things. You're going to buy more or less. So when we combine these two ideas, when we are combining these two ideas, let's focus our attention. We are first assuming that good X is a normal good, and we are now assuming that the price of good X have gone down. We are going to have two effects of that. First of all, we are going to have a substitution effect, which will tell you to buy more of good X, right? Because good X is now the cheaper good, so you buy more of that. And our income effect, since our good is a normal good, and our price of X going down really increases my purchasing power, our income effect tells you to buy more of good X as well. So the final effect is that whenever price of good X go down, you buy more of X, which is nothing but my law of demand. My price going down, I buy more. Law of demand, right? Notice law of demand is not coming only from the substitution effect. It is also coming from the income effect. It's a combination of these two effects. Both of them are in the same direction, right? My income effect is telling us to buy more. My substitution effect is also telling us to buy more when price is going down for a normal good. When the good is normal, price going down causes my demand to go up. Straightforward law of demand. This is good X, whose price just went down. In my bundle, there is also another good, Y. What happens to Y? Everything changes, by the way. So when the price of one good changes, everything has to change because you have a budget constraint. And when you think about buying one of the goods more or less or whatever, your allocation for the other good will also change. So Y cannot really remain unchanged. We also have to think about Y. Although the price of X changes, we have to think about what our consumer is doing for good Y. For good Y, we are also going to have the same assumption. we're going to assume that good y is a normal good. And just like good x, our good y will also have the substitution effect and income effect. But this is different for good y, right? Why? Because the price of good x have gone down, which means that good y is now relatively more expensive. Isn't that right? If the price of good x goes down, good y is now relatively more expensive. So my substitution effect is now telling me to buy less of y. Right? So my substitution effect tells me to buy less of y. Notice that this is consistent with buying more of x. I buy more of x, so I buy less of y. Kind of makes sense. We're going to look at that in a minute. But I think it is the income effect which is fascinating. Yes?
Where it says normal and an arrow, what's the word for both? Or what does that say for?
Which one? This one or this
no,
one?
where it says normal and then inferior after the arrow of normal, what does that say? Something both x, comma y, normal, by.
Oh, assume good x is a normal good.
No.
The second line from the top.
Under, yeah.
Oh, this is normal and then inferior.
Yeah, what's it say after the arrow?
If
If.
both,
Okay.
these are meaning that they are repetitions. I apologize.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry. These are the repetitions, right? That's why, and this is also like repetitions, right? That's why I have. I'm being a little lazy today. I apologize. Okay. So it is the income effect which is now interesting for our y. For y, notice nothing happened to the price, but good x suddenly became cheaper, and the consumer's purchasing power has gone up. So, although our substitution effect is telling us to buy less of y because y is now the relatively more expensive good, our income effect is telling us very different things. Our income effect is telling us that you now have more purchasing power, so you can buy more y because you have more income. And if you have more income, you should buy more of all of these goods because all of them are normal goods in this case. So for our y, we are now going to have a competing force. Our substitution effect is going to tell us to buy less of y, and our income effect is going to tell us to buy more of y. And therefore, the effect on y is not clear because we have two competing forces. If the substitution effect is stronger than income effect. What is substitution effect? It is telling us to buy less of y. Income effect is telling us to buy more of y. If my substitution effect, SE, is greater than income effect, is dominating, is stronger than income effect, the final effect is that you are going to buy less of y. But it could happen that the substitution effect which is telling you to buy less of y is weaker than the income effect which is telling you to buy more of y. And if you have that, you could actually end up buying more y. Although y is now relatively the more expensive good. And obviously a third possibility is that substitution effect and income effect are identical. So the downward pressure and the upward pressure really cancel each other out and your y will remain unchanged. So you can have three fundamentally different kind of effect on y. But the effect on x is pretty clear. When the price of x goes down, you buy more of x. Are these consistent with our utility maximization? Let's go back to the beginning of our equation. So we had an equation where marginal utility per dollar on x is equal to marginal utility per dollar on y. We had a situation where price of y just went down, and we have just demonstrated that it is definitely true that when price of x goes down, our consumer is going to buy more of x. If our consumer buys more of x, my marginal utility will go down according to the law of diminishing marginal utility, and the left-hand side could remain unchanged. Isn't that right? If my price goes down and my marginal utility goes down, my left-hand side could remain unchanged, which means that my right-hand side really does not need to change. What is unchanged on the right-hand side? My price of y is unchanged. We are not assuming any change in the price of y. So if my left-hand side remains unchanged, my right-hand side also will remain unchanged, and that can only happen when y is the same, right? Do you see that? When the marginal utility per dollar on y remains unchanged. So it's theoretically it's possible that when the price of x goes down, you buy more of x and you don't buy any y, or you don't change your consumption of y. Y remains unchanged, which is one of the three possibilities that can happen to y. When you go home, you should convince yourself that the two other possibilities that can happen to good y also is consistent with your utility maximization. So with that, we have just covered two very important theories that explains how consumers respond to changes in price. Whenever prices change, we said that relative price change and relative income change. When relative price change, one good becomes more expensive, the other good becomes less expensive, and this is called substitution effect, which tells us that you should always buy the cheaper goods. In addition to substitution effect, we have a relative income change, which tells us that you should buy more if your income is higher or purchasing power is higher. You should buy less if your income or your purchasing power is lower. The example that we provided was a case where price of X went down. Our substitution effect told us that we should buy more of X. Our income effect also told us to buy more of X. So at the end, you buy more of X, the effect on Y is not certain. Any question? Any question? Please feel free to take a moment to absorb this idea. This idea is in your exam, so there is no point hiding about this, right? So if you have any question, you please ask me right now. Otherwise, I will go back to the slides and cover the same material, same discussion about income effect and substitution effect from your textbook perspective. So what I have just covered is a generic description about income effect and substitution effect. Let's now move back to our slides and look at how these conditions are being satisfied. So this is what we covered in the last class. In the last class, we found that based on the utility maximization, our consumer gets three different combinations of goods that maximize their utility. These three combination costs different, gives you different level of utility. And we argued that which bundle the consumer is going to choose really depends on the income level that he or she has. If our consumer has $10, our consumer is going to buy the second combination. If our income is $13, our consumer is going to buy the third combination. We're going to extend this idea by assuming that our income is $10 and our consumer is buying the second bundle, 3 units of pizza and 4 cups of Coke. The price of pizza was $2 and I think the price of Coke was $1. That was the original example. Now, imagine that the price of pizza have just gone down from $2 to $1.50. This is like a reduction in price of good X, right? So your pizza is now cheaper from $2 to $1.50. How should you respond to that change in price? So if the price of pizza goes down, and we are going to assume that pizza and Coke, both of them are normal goods, we are going to have two effects of this price change in price of pizza. First of all, you now can see that your pizza is now relatively cheaper than Coke, right? Relatively cheaper than Coke. Although Coke was $1, pizza was $2, when the price of pizza goes down to $1.50, your pizza becomes relatively cheaper than Coke, which tells you that you should buy more of pizza, according to this idea of substitution effect. So Number 2 is going to provoke substitution effect. And number 1 is going to provoke income effect. What is income effect? When the price of pizza went down from $2 to $1.50, your purchasing power just increased. You can now buy more of both or at least one of them, if both of them are normal goods, which in this case is true by assumption. We are assuming both of these goods are normal goods. So the first effect is called income effect, and the second effect is called substitution effect. There is a very detailed definition of these two. Please memorize them. There is a very high chance you actually might get a question in the exam that actually asks you about the definitions. The definition of income effect is what we covered. It shows you what happens, what happens when there is a change in price, and there is a change in relative income or a change in relative purchasing power, and how should you respond to the goods. So our income effect says that if the good is a normal good, and if your income increases, you buy more, and if the good is an inferior good, you actually buy less when your income goes up. So income effect is kind of tricky, and we should be very much aware of that. Okay, so in this case, the pizza is a normal good by assumption. So since my relative income or purchasing power has gone up, I am richer, relatively richer now, I am going to buy more pizza according to my income effect. My substitution effect is very straightforward. Because of this reduction in price of pizza, my pizza is relatively cheaper, and my substitution effect tells us that I should buy more pizza. So for my pizza, there are two more. One more coming from substitution effect, another more coming from my income effect. So in the end, I will be buying more pizza when the price of pizza goes down. But what will happen to Coke? There's another good, right? Should I buy more of that or should I buy less of that? It's a very valid question. Before we answer that question, let us try to see by using these numerical numbers as how a reduction in the price really increases your purchasing power. Imagine for the time being that even after the change in price, you are still buying the same bundle of goods. 3 units of pizza and 4 units of Coke. That was your utility maximizing combination. We have shown in the previous slides that if the prices were $2 and $1, $2 for pizza and $1 for Coke, with $10, the bundle that you are buying, which is 3 units of pizza and 4 units of Coke, really exhausts your income. So your income is completely utilized and you maximize your utility. When the price of pizza goes down from just $2 to $1.50, the previous bundle now costs less than $10. It costs exactly $8.50. Do we all see the calculation that is in the slide? Sorry. So, with $1.50 the price of pizza and $1 the price of Coke, your bundle is now 1.5 times 3 plus $4, which is $8.50. Okay? Sorry, it's not in the slide. This is in this slide, right? What just happened? Because of the decline in the price of one good, you now have some extra income, extra money that you are not spending. Right? You actually have $1.50 exactly, which you haven't spent. You all see that? That is exactly what we mean by an increase in purchasing power. What are we going to do with that extra $1.50? There's a very high chance that you're probably going to buy more of pizza because you have to do that. Right? And if you buy one more pizza, that $1.50 gets exhausted. So automatically you cannot buy any more Coke. So the new bundle is 4 pizza and 4 Coke. And that is consistent with your utility maximization. That is also consistent with your budget, which is $10. With the same budget, as a result of a decline in the price of pizza, you are now able to afford more pizza and the same amount of Coke. Do we all see that? Let's look at this problem from a mathematical perspective. Imagine the original utility maximization was happening at a level where you are buying 3 units of pizza and 4 units of Coke. At that level, the marginal utility per dollar was actually 5. And suddenly the price of pizza went down, and you can see immediately that this ratio on the left hand side went up. Right? If the ratio on the left hand side goes up, so this is marginal utility per dollar on pizza goes up, what do you do? What we have covered in the previous class was that if marginal utility of x divided by x is greater than marginal utility of y divided by y, then you buy more x. Do you remember that? You buy more x, so the marginal utility per dollar of x goes down, and the left hand side slowly creeps towards the right hand side, and you have an equilibrium. And that's exactly what we're doing here. When the right hand side ratio is greater than the left hand side ratio, you buy more pizza. As a result, marginal utility per pizza goes down. Your price also have gone down, and that could really reduce the left hand side ratio until it is equal to the right hand side. So it is consistent. It is consistent with our utility maximization. It is also consistent with our explanation of the income effect and substitution effect. Any question about what we have just covered? What I'm going to do now is I'm going to make a major leap of material. Oh, sorry, I apologize. I need to cover this one. So you can, when you go home, please take a look at this table. This table is kind of important. In a minute, I'm going to look at a problem from your sample exam where this kind of table is utilized. You need this kind of calculation to really figure out your utility maximization combination point. The reason why I say that I'm going to cover this table is that this table is absolutely important because it provides you a summary of what we have just covered. Okay, so we have just covered situations when price goes down, right? When price goes down, we say that the consumer's purchasing power increases, and when consumer's purchasing power increases, we are going to have an increase in income, increase in the purchasing power if the good is a normal good, and it is going to call us to decrease the good if the good is an inferior good. So income effect is always tricky. But substitution effect is not tricky. Substitution effect tells us that whenever the price of a good goes down, it really makes that good cheaper compared to the other one, and you buy more of that. So when price goes down, if the good is a normal good, it tells us to increase. If it is an inferior good, it tells us to decrease. But it always tells us to increase according to substitution effect. So we just covered that. Let us now spend a little bit of time trying to understand what happens when there is an increase in price rather than decrease. So let's reorganize the entire experiment. Now let's imagine that the price of Coke is going up, or price of X is going up. If the price of X goes up, first of all, your purchasing power decreases. If your purchasing power decreases, meaning that your income has gone down, then you're going to decrease your good according to your income effect if the good is a normal good. But on the other hand, if your good is an inferior good, you are going to buy more of that good. This is amazing, right? That when we see an increase in price of a good, our income effect tells us to buy more of that good. How can that even be possible? Any thought on this? How can it be possible that the price of a good goes up and you buy more of that good? this is a direct violation of what we have covered in the last couple of chapters because it violates law of demand. Do we all see that? How can that happen?
Is it one of those like inferior goods?
It has to be an inferior good. That's a very good intuition, but something has to be very special about this good, right?
Extremely cheap or something?
It could be the other way around. Let's come back to that again. At least you have identified that it has to be an inferior good. Okay? So, in case of a price increase, my substitution effect is always straightforward. It tells me to buy less. But my income effect is kind of confusing. Right? It tells me to buy less if the good is a normal good, but it tells me to buy more if the good is an inferior good. We're going to look at the application of this idea in the next couple of minutes. So, both the decrease and the increase in the price of the good is relevant for your upcoming exam on Friday. What I'm going to do, I'm going to skip a lot of material which you should see, the amount of material that I am skipping, and I will look at an empirical topic. And this is fascinating. I usually don't cover making the connections, but this particular empirical observation is fascinating. I'm going to go back one step so that I have some empty space, and in that empty space, I will be drawing a demand curve, which you have never seen before. I'm going to say that under unusual circumstance, my demand curve look like this. When, as my price goes up from P1 to P2, my quantity demanded would go up from Q1 to Q2. Is this possible? Is this possible to have a demand curve which looks like an upward sloping curve? Let me tell you a story before we move on to that. Although I'm running out of time, the story is very important. When I was in the second year of my undergraduate program, one of my friend, who was one of the smartest person in our class, wanted to draw an empirical demand curve for a certain good. He wanted to see, he collected information about price, he collected information about the corresponding quantity demanded, and he wanted to plot. This is actual data, no made up stuff. Are we all clear on that? Once he collected those two information and he plotted his demand curve looked like an upward sloping graph. That destroyed his career because there was no one to tell him that in the data there is a realistic possibility that demand curve can be upward sloping. Okay? The question is why? How can this be a upward sloping demand curve? So let's try to understand this. Okay? So whenever the price of this good is going up, we know that two things are happening. We have substitution effect, which tells you that since this good is becoming more expensive, you buy less of that good. Right? And your income effect tells you that since your relative income has gone down, whether you are going to buy more or less of this good depends on whether the good is a normal good or an inferior good. So you can have two different effects. If the good is a normal good, then you are going to buy less. But if this good is an inferior good, you are going to buy more. Isn't that right? So let's focus on a good which is actually an inferior good. In case of an inferior good, if my income effect dominates my substitution effect, meaning that my income effect is telling me to buy more of that good and my substitution effect is telling me to buy less of that good, and my income effect dominates substitution effect, I am going to buy more. Okay? And if I buy more, when my price is going up, I am looking at a demand curve which looks like this. Right? Is this only a theoretical possibility, or are there empirical examples of this? The picture that you're looking at is an actual empirical example of a good for which when the price goes up, you buy more of that good. This good is called a given good. So obviously notice that the given good is clearly an inferior good. But there is something beyond. There is something special about the given good, in the sense that in the given good, the income effect is extremely powerful than the substitution effect. So when can the income effect be stronger than substitution effect? It's actually exactly opposite to what he said. If this good is what your life depends on, your income effect would be very, very strong on that good. Okay? So two economists went to China in 2006 and they conducted experiments, and they found that whenever the price of rice went down in China, which is their staple food, went up in China, people actually started buying more, right? So that is a clear indication that our demand curve is an upward sloping graph. Okay? Any question? I'm going to quickly close this, and I want to move to the sample exams. I'm going to start with question number 29. After today's class, I'm going to upload these slides because these slides have a little bit more explanations. The question that you're looking at, table 10.2, you have two goods. Can you guys from the backside see the numbers? Okay, so you have two goods, soup and sandwich. You have to figure out the bundle of goods that maximizes your utility. So the way you do that is you create two additional columns where you first calculate the marginal utility of each of the goods, and you then calculate the marginal utility divided by price, where the price for soup is $2 and the price for sandwich is $3. So you have marginal utility per dollar for soup, marginal utility per dollar for the sandwich. When you do that, you realize that there are three combinations that really can maximize your utility. One is when you buy 2 units of soup and 2 units of chicken sandwich. Do you all see that? Both of them have a marginal utility per dollar of 10. Then you can also have a combination where you buy 3 units of soup and 4 units of sandwiches. Do we all see that? That also has equal marginal utility per dollar. The third one is when you buy 4 units of soup and 5 units of chicken. They also have the same marginal utility per dollar. So you basically have 3 combination of goods that can maximize your utility. So the question is, which one are you going to buy? The answer is, it depends on my income, my budget constraint. The budget constraint that I have is $18. The budget that I have is $18. So in order to find out my profit, my utility maximizing combination, I have to calculate the cost of the sandwich of my bundle. So the cost of my first bundle, which is 2 soup and 3 sandwiches, is about $10. The cost of my second bundle, which is 3 soup and 4 sandwiches, is 18. Can anyone do the cost of the bundle for the third one? Can anyone tell me what the number is? It's actually 23, right? So if you look at these 3 bundles, you notice immediately that the third bundle is not feasible. You have $18, and you really cannot buy that bundle because that bundle requires $23. You all see that? You will also not buy the first bundle because the first bundle really does not exhaust all your money. You want to be able to utilize all your budget, and that is coming from the second bundle, where your income is $18 and the cost of the bundle is also $18. So the answer is B. You buy 3 cups of soup and 4 sandwiches. So that's one question. Question number 30 is a variation of what we have covered today and yesterday, where you have 2 goods, you calculate the marginal utility per dollar between the 2 goods, and you figure out how you can maximize your utility. what you will find is that out of these two goods, one is socks and the other one is banana, the marginal utility per dollar on socks is higher than marginal utility per dollar of banana. So we know that whenever we have an inequality like this, you always buy more of the left-hand side goods. So you buy more socks and you buy less banana. So it's a very straightforward question. I have 3 minutes. In that 3 minutes, I'm going to skip 31. 31 is about substitution effect. Please take a look at that. I want to end our class today with question number 32. So if the price of the latte goes down and latte is a normal good, which one is the correct answer? So we know that whenever the price falls, okay, so whenever the price falls, my income effect is that you buy more if this is a normal good, and you buy less if the good is an inferior good. On the other hand, whenever the price rises, our income effect tells us to buy less of the good if the good is a normal good, and more if the good is an inferior good. So, whenever you have a reduction in the price of a normal good, the answer is B, where both the income effect and the substitution effect lead you to buy more of that good. That is the only feasibly correct answer. Okay? I have 1 more minute. In that 1 more minute, I just want to show you the last question. So the last question is a graphical question. And in the graph, what you see is that there is a change in price, and it leads to a corresponding change in quantity demanded. In this case, price actually increases from $5 to $5.75, and quantity demanded increases from Q1 to Q0. So the question is, how can that be possible? How can, when price goes up, your quantity demanded goes down? In order to answer that, you need to invoke both the explanation of income effect and substitution effect and reach to a conclusion. Good luck with the exam. Please try to come early to the exam. You will require a calculator. If you don't bring a calculator, you will not be allowed to use your cell phone. So please bring a calculator. You will need that.
I'll text you when I'm done. You said you're going to upload this PowerPoint?
Yes. It's already there, but I will upload the updated version of this.